My phone has been face down on this kitchen table for 3 days. Not because I am afraid of what is on it. Not because I am waiting for an apology that has not come. I turned it face down because I finally reached the place every woman arrives at eventually. The place where the waiting ends. Where the noise stops. Where you pour your coffee, sit in your own chair, in your own house, and feel something so clean and so complete that it almost frightens you. Peace, on your own terms. After a very long time. My name is Lorene Adams. I am 58 years old. I spent 31 years as a hospital systems administrator in Charlotte, North Carolina. I managed budgets in the tens of millions. I sat across from men who thought my silence was weakness and watched them recalibrate. I raised a daughter alone, kept a beautiful home, and built a life that belongs entirely to me. And 8 months ago, that daughter slid a piece of paper across my dining room table that changed everything between us. If you are watching from wherever you are, and I want to know where that is, drop it in the comments. Stay with me. Because what I am about to tell you is going to make you feel something. It was a Sunday, late October. Kendall came for dinner the way she always did. Keys jingling, heels on my hardwood, the smell of whatever she had spritzed on before she walked through the door. I had cooked. Pot roast, rice, the green beans she has loved since she was 9 years old. We ate. We talked about her job, about nothing, about everything light and easy the way Sunday dinners are supposed to go. Then the plates were cleared. Kendall reached into her bag. She did not say anything. She did not look nervous. She pulled out a folded document, smoothed it once with her palm, and slid it across the table toward me the way you slide a check toward a cashier. I picked it up. It was a wedding vendor breakdown. Typed, printed, itemized. A venue at $18,000. Catering priced per head for 200 guests. Imported florals. A photography package. And a dress. One single line item for a dress that cost more than most people's car notes. At the bottom, a handwritten total. $74,850. And beneath it, in Kendall's own handwriting, rounded up to an even number. 75,000. I looked up from the paper slowly. My daughter was sitting across from me with her hands folded on the table and her chin lifted and her eyes steady. She was not nervous. She was not asking. There was no please in her posture, no uncertainty in her expression. She was waiting. The way you wait for a transaction to process. The way you wait for a signature on a line that was always going to get signed. In 31 years of managing hospitals, I learned to read rooms before I read reports. And what I read in that room, in that moment, was not a daughter sharing a dream with her mother. It was an invoice. I had been categorized, not as the woman who raised her, not as someone whose blessing meant something, but as a funding source with a track record of saying yes. I set the document down. I looked at my daughter, and I felt something move through me that was not anger and was not hurt. It was quieter than both and sharper than either. It was recognition. The kind that, once it arrives, does not leave. I said, "Kendall, sit down. We need to talk about this." She sighed. Barely. Just barely. The smallest exhale of impatience, as though I had asked her to repeat herself when she had already been perfectly clear. That sound told me everything before I had spoken a single word of what I actually needed to say. That document sat on my kitchen counter for 6 days. I did not throw it away. I did not call Kendall. I did not pray over it or cry over it or slide it into a drawer where I would not have to look at it. I left it right there on the counter next to my coffee maker, where I would see it every single morning, because I have spent 31 years making decisions with a clear head, and I was not about to stop now. I wanted to understand it, not emotionally, precisely. The venue was $18,000, a ballroom downtown that I had actually attended an event in once, Beautiful, yes, but $18,000 beautiful for 4 hours of a Saturday afternoon. The catering was priced per head, and the head count on that document was 200 people. I did not know Kendall knew 200 people. The florals were imported, not local, not seasonal. Imported, with a separate line for installation. The photography package included a videographer, a second shooter, and something listed as a golden hour session. The dress had its own line, no price range, one number. And that number alone could have furnished a living room. I am not a woman who is opposed to beautiful things. I raised Kendall in a beautiful home. I taught her the difference between quality and waste, between investing in something that lasts and spending on something that performs. I thought those lessons had taken root. What I understood, standing at that counter on the third morning, was that none of those choices had been made with me in mind as her mother. Not one line item carried the fingerprint of a daughter who had thought, "My mother will be proud to give this." Every choice had been made with me in mind as something else entirely. A resource, an account with a history of approval. And that history. I had to be honest with myself about that history. When Kendall took her first job at 22, I added her to one of my credit cards. "Just a cushion," I told her. "Just so you are never caught without options." She had called me grateful that day. I still remember it. Then I started the monthly deposit. $800 quietly, so her early years would not grind her down the way mine had ground me. I never asked for acknowledgement. I did not need it. I gave because I wanted to. But somewhere in the past 2 years, something had shifted so gradually I had almost missed it. The thank you calls after the deposit stopped coming. I noticed. I filed it. Then one evening, Kendall was at my house with Marshawn, and she mentioned the card to him, not privately, not with any awareness that I was standing 6 feet away. Casually, the way you mention something that belongs to you. She called it her card, not her mother's card. Hers. I stood in my own kitchen and heard my daughter claim my generosity as her property. I filed that too. Now I was opening every file I had ever closed and reading them in sequence. And the picture they made together was not a comfortable one. This was not a daughter who had drifted. This was a pattern, slow, consistent, and completely unexamined by her, and if I was being truthful, by me. I picked the document up one more time. I uncapped a pen. I circled that handwritten $75,000 and I wrote a number beside it. A real number. A generous number. The number a mother who loves her daughter and also respects her own money would write. I would bring it to Kendall the following week. I believed, sitting there, that she would see the love in it. I was wrong. I have never been a woman who withholds. Kendall's college tuition, paid. Every semester, every textbook, every fee they slipped into the bill, hoping nobody would notice. The car note in year 2 of her first job when her transmission went, and she called me crying at 7 in the morning. Handled, quietly, no lecture attached. The credit card, the $800 every month like clockwork. 29 years of yes, stacked one on top of the other, so consistent and so reliable that I had become something she never had to think about. That was my doing as much as hers. I understand that now. But understanding it did not mean I was going to hand over $75,000 for a single day without a conversation. So I called her. I asked her to come over. I told her I had been thinking and I had something to show her. I had spent 2 evenings putting together a real wedding plan. Not a reduction. A celebration. Just an honest one. A venue in Charlotte I knew personally. Elegant. The kind of room that photographs beautifully without costing $18,000 to rent for an afternoon. a caterer whose food I had eaten at 3 separate events and never forgotten. Flowers that were sophisticated and seasonal rather than imported and inflated. A photographer whose work I had watched stop people mid-conversation at a family gathering 2 years ago. I priced everything carefully. I printed it the same way she had printed hers, typed, itemized, clean. $15,000. A real wedding. A starting point for a real life. She arrived and sat across from me at the same table. I slid my document across to her. I kept my voice level and warm because that is how I meant it. I told her a wedding is one day, Kendall. What comes after it is a life. Let us make sure the life is funded. She looked at the paper. Something moved across her face that I was not prepared for. Not disappointment. I had braced for disappointment. What crossed her face was contempt. Fast. Barely contained. The expression of someone who has just been offered something beneath them. She pressed her lips together. She looked at my carefully prepared budget the way you look at something someone has handed you that you have no intention of keeping. Then she folded it, without reading past the first line, and put it in her bag. She said she needed to talk to Marshawn. Not I need to think about it. Not thank you, Mom. Let me consider this. She needed to talk to Marshawn. His name in her mouth in that moment was not the name of a partner she was consulting. It was the name of a superior she was reporting back to. I sat with that after she left. The house was very quiet. I had raised this woman. I had shown up for her in ways she had already stopped counting because they had become invisible to her. The way the floor beneath your feet becomes invisible. You only notice it when something shifts. Something had shifted. The hierarchy in my daughter's life had been reorganized, and I had not been consulted. Marshawn sat at the top of it now. I understood that clearly for the first time sitting alone at that table. And what disturbed me was not that she loved him. It was that she had handed him authority over a relationship he had not built, had not invested in, and had not earned. 3 days later, my phone rang. Kendall. I answered on the second ring. Her voice was flat, practiced, the voice of someone delivering a message they have rehearsed. She said Marshawn felt that if I could not commit to the full amount, they needed to revisit whether my presence at the wedding made sense. I went completely still. I said, Kendall, say that again. I have sat across from people who did not want me in the room my entire career. Hospital board members who thought a black woman with a spreadsheet was a novelty. Vendors who addressed the man beside me first. Administrators who used words like, perhaps we should revisit, when what they meant was, we do not intend to move. I learned early how to sit in those rooms without shrinking, how to let silence work for me, how to keep my face still while my mind moved 3 steps ahead. Not once in 31 years did anyone make me feel small. Marshawn Colber called me 2 days after that phone call. His tone was measured, calm, almost corporate, the voice of a man who had practiced what he was going to say and was pleased with how it sounded. He suggested we all meet in person. Clear the air, he said. I agreed. Not because I needed clarity, because I wanted to see his face when he said it. I arrived at their apartment before he did. Kendall let me in. She was moving around the kitchen with her back to me, doing small, unnecessary things, adjusting a dish towel, closing a cabinet that was already closed. She did not hug me. I sat on the couch and waited and looked at the room around me. The furniture was newer than I remembered. The couch I was sitting on still had that particular firmness of something recently purchased. I noticed the rug beneath it, the curtains, the television mounted on the wall like a statement. I recognized the things I had paid for without ever being asked. Marshawn came in and sat in the chair directly across from me. Kendall came from the kitchen and sat beside him. Not beside me, beside him. She tucked herself into that couch cushion like she was folding into formation, and something in my chest registered it before my mind had fully processed it. He started talking. He said he respected me. He said the word deeply. He respected me deeply. He said he loved Kendall and wanted their wedding to honor that love the way it deserved to be honored. He said he understood money was a sensitive topic. He said all of this smoothly, without breaking eye contact, the way a man speaks when he has confused confidence with correctness. Then he shifted. He said he worried my refusal to support the wedding would create tension on the day itself. He said weddings were emotional enough without family disagreements hanging over them. He said he wanted everyone focused on celebrating rather than dwelling on what had not happened. I listened. He kept talking. He said perhaps it would be better if everyone took some space, just until after the wedding, just enough distance to keep things positive. And then he said it. If I was unable to support the wedding they had planned, he felt, and Kendall agreed, that it might be better for everyone if I was not in attendance. Everyone. He used that word like my absence would be a kindness. Like removing me from my own daughter's wedding was a logistical courtesy rather than a punishment being delivered in a calm voice on a Tuesday evening. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I turned to Kendall. I waited. I gave her every second she needed. I watched her face for the correction that did not come, for the moment she would reach over and say, "That is not what we agreed on," or, "Marshawn, stop," or even just look at me with something that told me she was still in there. She met my eyes and said nothing. I stood up. I did not rush it. I picked up my purse and slid the strap onto my shoulder in one slow, unhurried motion. I reached down and buttoned the single button on my jacket, the way I have always buttoned it before walking into a room that requires me to be unshakable. Then I looked at Marshawn. I understand exactly what you're saying. I looked at my daughter one last time, not with anger, with something colder and cleaner than anger. Then I walked out. I sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes. Then I took out my phone and called my attorney. She was 7 years old, and she was wearing a yellow dress. It was a Sunday morning, early, before church, before the day had any weight to it. She had come padding into my bedroom in that dress, the sash already half undone because she had tried to tie it herself and nearly managed it, holding out the loose ends toward me with the complete and uncomplicated confidence of a child who has never once doubted that her mother will fix whatever needs fixing. I tied it. She turned around and looked up at me with that face, that open, unguarded, completely trusting face, and said, "You're the best, Mama." I have held that memory for 22 years, like something pressed between glass. I was still sitting in that parking lot when it came back to me. I had been in the car for 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I had called my attorney and gotten her voicemail and left a message that was 3 sentences long and completely controlled. Then I sat with my hands in my lap and let the memory arrive. That yellow dress, that half-tied sash, that face. And then I let myself sit inside what I had just watched my daughter do. It was not Marshawn that was breaking something in me. I had seen Marshawn coming from the moment Kendall started checking with him before she spoke. What broke something was the silence. Her silence. The moment I turned to her in that room and she looked directly at me and chose not to speak. Not because she had nothing to say. I know my daughter. She had plenty to say. She chose not to say it. That is a different thing entirely. That is a decision. I drove home. I walked through the front door and stood in the hallway, and the house felt different. The way a room feels different when you have just understood something inside it that you did not understand before. I walked down the hall slowly, past the kitchen, past the photographs on the wall, Kendall at 5, at 10, at her college graduation, that wide smile, that cap slightly crooked. I stopped at her bedroom door. It is still the way she left it when she moved out. The purple comforter she picked out herself at 15, the small shelf of books she never took with her, the photograph on the dresser of the two of us at Myrtle Beach, her head on my shoulder, both of us squinting into the sun. I stood in that doorway for a long time. Then I reached out and pulled the door closed. Not with force, not with ceremony, just closed it the way you close something you are no longer going to leave open by habit. And walked to my own room. I did not call anyone. I did not eat. I sat in my reading chair and I gave myself 1 hour. I set the timer on my phone, 60 minutes, and I sat there and felt every single thing I needed to feel. The grief of it, the confusion of it, the specific loneliness of being a mother who loved without condition and is only now asking whether that love was ever received the same way it was given. The timer went off. I stood up, washed my face, went to my desk. I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank's online portal. I navigated to account management. I found Kendall's name exactly where I had put it 6 years ago. Authorized user, full access. The card she had come to call hers. My cursor found the remove button. I did not click it yet. But my hand was steady. And for the first time since I walked out of that apartment, what I felt was not grief. It was agency. Grief has a shelf life if you let it have one. I gave mine exactly 1 hour the night before. 60 minutes, a timer, and everything I needed to feel, felt. When it went off, I stood up, washed my face, and made a decision that the woman who woke up the next morning was not going to be the same woman who sat in that parking lot. I was up at 5:40. Coffee made by 6. Legal pad on the table, pen uncapped, and the specific stillness of a woman who has already done her crying and is now doing something more useful. I called my attorney at 8:15. Her name is Valerie, and I have worked with her for 11 years. Every property matter, every contract review, every document that required someone with sharp eyes and no sentimentality. I told her what had happened briefly and without drama. I said I needed an emergency consultation to review my will, my beneficiary designations, and any joint financial instruments currently in another person's name. She did not ask unnecessary questions. The appointment was set for Thursday morning. I hung up and called my bank. I told the representative I needed to remove an authorized user from my credit account. She walked me through it, confirmed it would take effect within 24 to 48 hours. Then I flagged the joint checking account, the one I had been depositing $800 into every month for 6 years. For restructuring and closure, the debit card tied to it would be deactivated when the account closed. I would finalize everything after Thursday's consultation confirmed there were no complications. 12 minutes, 2 phone calls, 6 years of financial access, dismantled before my coffee went cold. I sat with that for a moment, not with guilt, with clarity. Then I called Celestine. That was the only call that cost me anything. Not because I had to explain myself. Celestine has never required explanation. It was the sound of her listening, the quality of her silence on the other end of the phone while I talked. She did not interrupt once. And when I finished, she was quiet for exactly the right amount of time before she said, "You did everything right, Lou. Everything. That was all I needed." She asked if I wanted company. I told her not yet. A few more days inside my own head. She understood the way only a sister can understand, without pushing, without performing concern. Before she hung up, she asked where I was going to be on the 23rd. The 23rd? The wedding date. I paused. Then I said, "Somewhere beautiful." After I hung up, I opened my laptop. I had wanted to go to Portugal for 15 years. I am not exaggerating that number. 15 years of magazine photographs and conversations I had started and then stopped, of thinking, maybe next year, maybe when work settles, maybe when Kendall is more stable, maybe when there is no one who needs something from me first. There was always a reason to wait. I had become so organized around other people's needs that my own had developed a habit of sitting quietly in the corner until I got around to them. I pulled up the flights and sat there for a moment, not hesitating, just recognizing the specific strangeness of having no one to check with, no schedule to cross-reference, no voice in my head reminding me that someone else's something came first. The feeling was so unfamiliar, I had to take a breath to name it. Then I picked up my card. A flight landing in Lisbon the morning of the 23rd. A hotel with a terrace above the water. I booked both without closing the laptop between them. When I shut it, I sat back in my chair and felt something I had not felt in longer than I could account for. Lightness. Clean and uncomplicated. The specific lightness of a woman who has finally decided to choose herself first. The light in Lisbon does not behave the way light behaves in Charlotte. It comes off the water differently, softer at the edges, warmer in the center. The kind of light that makes everything it touches look like it was painted rather than built. I had no reference for it. I had seen photographs, read descriptions, filed it away for 15 years under someday. Someday had arrived, and I was sitting on a hotel terrace in a robe with coffee I had not made myself, watching the Tagus River catch the morning and thinking about Charlotte. It was the 23rd. I knew the venue from the breakdown, the downtown ballroom, ceremony at 2 in the afternoon. I checked the time difference over my coffee. Lisbon runs 5 hours ahead, which meant while I was sitting here watching this river in this light, Kendall was waking up in Charlotte. While I finished breakfast, she would be in a salon chair somewhere. While I walked whatever street caught my eye this afternoon, she would be standing at the end of an aisle in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly expenses. I had prepared myself for this morning to be harder than it was. I had genuinely expected grief to arrive with the dawn. The particular grief of a mother missing the moment she had imagined for years. The corsage, the photographs in the foyer, the walk down the aisle. I had imagined all of it long before Kendall was even engaged, the way mothers do, quietly and without announcement. What arrived instead was something I had not prepared for. Not grief for the wedding. Grief for the daughter I had believed I had. Those are two separate losses, and only one of them was sitting on this terrace with me. The wedding I could release. I released it with my morning coffee and the river light, and a long exhale that surprised me with how clean it felt. What I was still holding, carefully, the way you hold something fragile, was the gap between who I thought my daughter was and what I had watched her do in that apartment. That gap had not closed. I thought about the dress I had almost bought. Deep burgundy, a boutique window downtown, the kind of dress that says I am the mother of the bride, and I am proud of every year it took to get here. I had stood at that window for a full minute. I had not gone in. 3 weeks later, I was in a shop off a cobblestone street in Lisbon, buying a linen shirt the color of sea salt, and it fit me like it was made for my specific shoulders, and I was wearing it right now. I preferred it. At 2 o'clock, Lisbon time, I lifted my coffee cup, the second one, from a cafe around the corner where the man behind the counter had nodded at me like a regular. And I said it out loud to nobody. "I hope it's beautiful, baby." I meant it. I want to be clear about that. There was no performance in it, no private sarcasm, no grace I was doing for an audience that was not there. I genuinely hoped the flowers were right, and the light was good. And she felt something true when she said those words. I hoped all of it. What I did not hope was that the beauty would outlast the money. That evening, I walked the waterfront until my feet told me to stop. I ate dinner at a restaurant where nobody knew my name, or my story, or my daughter. I ordered something I could not pronounce, and it arrived extraordinary. I watched couples and families and strangers living their lives around me and felt something settle in my chest that I had been missing for a long time. I felt like a woman who belonged entirely to herself. Back at the hotel, I found a missed call. Number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it. Then I noticed the area code. Charlotte. I looked at it for a moment longer than I meant to. Not because I thought it was Kendall. She knew my number. But because something about the timing felt strange. The call had come through less than an hour earlier. I looked at it once more, turned the phone face down on the nightstand, and opened the terrace door to let the night air in. Whatever it was could wait. Everything could wait. I was in Portugal. By day 3, I had stopped checking the time difference. Charlotte was 5 hours behind me, and I had decided to let it stay there. I had walked that morning until the city opened up into a wide harbor promenade, found a low stone wall above the water, and sat down with no particular plan beyond watching the afternoon burn itself out over the Tagus. The sky was doing something I did not have words for, layers of orange and copper pulling apart slowly, the water below catching every color and holding it. My phone rang. Celestine. I answered before the second ring because she is the only person on this earth I would interrupt a sunset like that for. She had been at a gathering the previous evening. A cousin's house, one of those informal post-wedding celebrations for family who could not make the ceremony. She told me this the way Celestine tells me everything, with the precision of a woman who has already sorted what I need to hear from what I do not, and is delivering only the former. People had asked about me. She told them I was traveling. When someone pressed, she said I had a prior commitment that could not be moved. Nobody pushed further. Celestine has a tone that does not invite pushing, and everyone in our family has learned to read it. But the fact that people asked at all, the fact that the room apparently went slightly uncomfortable when my name came up, told its own story. Whatever Kendall and Marchand had said to explain my absence had not fully landed. I asked what they told people. Celestine was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then she said, that you chose not to come, that it was your decision, that they had tried to include you, but you declined. I sat with that. The reframing was not surprising. I had expected something like it. A version of events in which Lorene Adams was the problem, the difficult one, the mother who made a scene over money and removed herself from her own daughter's wedding out of stubbornness. That version was cleaner for them. Easier to present over a dinner plate. It was still painful to hear it said out loud. Then Celestine said, "But here is what I need you to know, Lou." She told me Bernadette Colbert was at that gathering. Marchand's mother. She said Bernadette had been quiet most of the evening, not unfriendly, just contained, the way a person is contained when they are holding something they have not yet decided what to do with. At one point, she had pulled Celestine aside, not to make conversation, with purpose. She asked, "Is Lorene all right?" Not where was I, not why didn't I come, not what happened with the wedding. She asked if I was all right. I turned that question over slowly while Celestine kept talking. That is the question of a woman who already suspects the answer is no and has already started wondering who made it that way. Celestine added, "I know her a little, actually. Her cousin Deshonda and my cousin Patrice go back 15 years. She is a good woman, Lou. She looked troubled all evening. Not the way people look when they are curious. The way they look when something is sitting on them. Then Celestine told me one more thing. Apparently, someone at the gathering had mentioned how unusual it was for a bride's mother to miss the wedding entirely. Not in a mean way. Just conversationally. Bernadette had not said much after that, but she had gotten very quiet. A little later, another relative mentioned the honeymoon. Said something about how expensive everything must have been between the wedding and the trip. According to Celestine, Bernadette had asked a simple question. Did Lorene help with it? Nobody seemed to know the answer. The conversation moved on, but Bernadette did not. She stayed thoughtful the rest of the evening. I had met Bernadette twice. The engagement dinner, warm, present, the kind of woman who asks follow-up questions because she actually listened to your first answer. A brief front yard introduction 6 months later. Both times she had hugged me like she meant it. I filed what Celestine told me carefully, not in the drawer where I put things I am done with. In the other one. Before we hung up, Celestine asked how it was. I looked at the last thin line of sun going down into the water. I said, Celestine, I should have come here years ago. She laughed, full and real and completely unguarded. It was the first laughter I had heard in days, and it landed on me like warm water on tired shoulders. I stayed on that wall until the sky went completely dark, and the harbor lights came on below me one by one. Somewhere over the Atlantic, window seat, the sun coming up on the wrong side. I had spent 8 days watching the light come from the left. Now it was on my right, and that small reversal felt like the most honest summary of everything. I was pointed back toward a life that was going to look familiar and feel completely different. I thought about the woman who had boarded a plane to Lisbon 8 days ago, hollowed out, newly wounded, running toward something she could not name because naming it would have required admitting how badly she needed it. I looked at my reflection in the window glass. We shared a face. That was about all. I landed in Charlotte just after noon. Drove myself home from the airport the way I do everything, without ceremony, without announcement. Pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment before going in, not hesitating, just arriving, intentionally. I walked through the front door and stood in the hallway and looked at my house, the paintings on the wall, the reading chair by the window, the kitchen counter where I had left that vendor breakdown for 6 days because I needed to understand it clearly before I responded to it. Everything exactly where I had left it. Everything exactly mine. I had bought every piece of furniture in this house, chosen every color on these walls, built this life from a salary I earned in rooms where people regularly underestimated me. Nobody had given me any of this. I unpacked slowly. Set my Portugal photographs on the counter. I would print them before the week was out. Made tea. Called Valerie and confirmed the will updates had been finalized in my absence. Then I checked my accounts. The joint checking was closed. The debit card deactivated. The credit account showed Kendall's name nowhere. Everything I had set in motion before I left was done. Celestine arrived at 6 with food, and we sat at the kitchen table the way we have sat at kitchen tables, together our entire lives, unhurried, honest, saying the things that need saying without decoration. She had held back details on the phone in Lisbon that she gave me now in full. It had been just over 2 weeks since the wedding. Marchand and Kendall had returned from their honeymoon 4 days ago, 1 week away. Celestine had heard through a cousin that money had already become a point of tension between them. Nothing dramatic yet, just the kind of conversations newlyweds have when bills start arriving and expectations collide with reality. She did not know specifics, and neither did I. but she said the cousin sounded concerned. They were back in the apartment now, settling into the life they had built on a foundation they had not fully examined. Celestine heard through that same cousin that the two of them had gone to a home goods store over the weekend. I looked at my phone on the table between us. I said, "She hasn't called." Celestine shook her head slowly. "Not yet." I sat with that. 2 words that contained a world of information. Not yet meant it was coming. Not yet meant Kendall had come back from her honeymoon, stepped back into real life, and discovered that some things she had always assumed would be there were no longer there. Not yet meant the call I had been expecting was closer than it appeared. What it also meant, and this was the part that settled into my chest like the last piece of something clicking into place, was that her first instinct was not to call her mother because she missed her. It was not to call because she was sorry. It was not even to call to check in after weeks of silence following the biggest day of her life. When something stopped working, she would call her mother. The distinction did not surprise me. It just confirmed what I already knew. I picked up my phone, looked at it for a long moment. Then I set it face up on the table instead of face down. I was not hiding from what was coming. I was ready for it. Celestine watched me and said nothing. We finished our food, washed the dishes side by side the way our mother taught us, said goodnight at the door. I went to bed and slept without interruption for the first time in weeks. I have spent my whole life preparing for things, not obsessively, not with anxiety, just with the steady, practical discipline of a woman who learned early that the people who stay standing in hard moments are usually the ones who saw them coming and did something quiet about it before they arrived. I prepared for every difficult conversation in my career. I prepared for Kendall's teenage years, bought the books, had the talks, stayed up late enough to be awake when she needed to talk. I prepared for retirement. I prepared for Portugal. I prepared for this too. I just did not know it would arrive on a Thursday. I was in my reading room. I had been slowly reclaiming that corner of the house since I got back. A new lamp on, the side table, the shelves rearranged to hold the books I actually wanted to read rather than the ones that had accumulated there by habit. It was becoming mine in a way it had not been before. Small changes, intentional ones. My phone buzzed on the arm of the chair. I picked it up. Kendall's name on the screen. I felt nothing dramatic. No spike, no dread. Just recognition. I opened the text. 5 words. "Mom, the card is not working." I read it once. Set the phone face down on the chair arm. Picked up my book and read 1 full page. I know exactly which page because I have read that same page 4 times since, and the words still land the same way. Then I set the book down and picked the phone back up. 5 words. No greeting. No. I've been thinking about you after weeks of silence. No, I know things have been strange between us. No acknowledgement that the last time we were in the same room, her husband told me my absence would be a courtesy and she sat beside him and said nothing. Just a card. Just a problem. Just the assumption. Unexamined. Automatic. As natural to her as breathing. That I was still there. Still available. Still the floor she stood on without looking down. Just over 2 weeks. That was the silence she had managed before the transaction required her to make contact. A honeymoon, a new apartment, a whole new life begun. And the first words she sent her mother were not about any of it. They were about a card that was not working. And then something happened that I had not fully predicted. I smiled. Not a performance. Not the tight, controlled expression I wear in rooms that require composure. A real smile the kind that starts somewhere below your sternum and rises on its own without asking permission. Because those 5 words had just done something that weeks of waiting could not do. They confirmed it. All of it. Every suspicion I had filed carefully. Every moment I had chosen to examine instead of excuse, confirmed cleanly in a single text. There is a specific relief that lives on the other side of confirmation. The not knowing is always heavier than the knowing. I had been carrying the question for months. Now I had the answer in 5 words, and my hands were steady. I thought about Bernadette at that gathering, troubled and quiet. I thought about the Portugal photograph propped against the lamp on this very side table. I thought about Valerie's voice on the phone confirming the will was done. I thought about the woman on that plane and the woman in this chair and the distance between them. Then I opened the text. Typed 3 words. Wrong number, sweetheart. Press send. Put the phone face down. Found my page. Outside, the light was going amber toward evening. Somewhere across Charlotte, my daughter was standing in a home goods store with a declined card and 3 words on her screen that were about to rearrange everything she thought she understood about her mother. I read my book. I did not watch for a response. I want to be clear about that. I did not sit in that reading room with my phone tilted toward me, waiting for 3 dots to appear. I put it face down, found my page, and read until the light outside went from amber to gray. Whatever happened on the other side of those 3 words was not my business to monitor. I had said what I said. The rest belonged to her. But Kendall called Celestine from the parking lot of that store, still holding the declined card, still staring at her phone. And Celestine called me that evening. So I know exactly what happened. And I am going to tell you. She read those 3 words in the middle of that store and stood there long enough that Marchand noticed. He came over and she showed him the screen. He looked at it and did what Marchand does. He reframed it immediately, confidently, without a single pause for doubt. He told her it was a mistake. Autocorrect. Her mother must have meant to send that to someone else and hit the wrong contact. He said it the way he says everything, like a man who has already decided what is true and is simply informing you of it. He needed it to be a mistake. His entire financial architecture depended on Lorene Adams remaining available. Kendall called the number. It rang 4 times. I did not answer. She called again. Same result. Then she texted. Mom, it's me, Kendall. Nothing. She texted again. Mom, please call me back. Nothing. The phone that had answered within 2 rings, for 29 years, through school trips and car troubles and late nights and every version of need she had ever had, rang into silence and stayed there. Marchand told her to go to the house. Just drive over, he said. Probably a phone issue. Just go. Kendall said, not yet. That detail is important. She did not go to the house. She went to the parking lot and sat in her car and called Celestine, which tells me that somewhere beneath the confusion and the declined card and Marchand's certainty, some part of my daughter already knew this was not a phone issue. Some part of her already knew that what she was holding was not a mistake. Celestine answered on the 2nd ring. Kendall told her everything: the store, the card, the text, the 3 words, the unanswered calls. She laid it out the way you lay something out when you are hoping someone will tell you there is an explanation you have not thought of yet. Celestine was quiet for a moment, not because she was surprised, because she was choosing her words the way you choose them when you know the truth is going to land hard, and there is no version of it that does not. She said, "Baby, you need to call your mother. That is all I'm going to say." And she said goodnight and hung up. For the first time in this entire story, Kendall had no one to translate it for her. No Marchand to reframe it. No cousin to soften it. No Celestine to bridge the distance. Just a parking lot and a silent phone, and 3 words that were sitting in her chest, refusing to mean anything other than what they meant. I was not there. I cannot tell you exactly what she felt. But I know my daughter, and I know that the one thing Kendall has never been able to tolerate, not since she was 7 years old, is standing on the outside of a door that used to open for her. She built her entire adult life walking through doors I held open. This was the first one I had ever closed. The next day passed. No call, no text, no car in my driveway. The day after that, my phone rang, and the name on the screen stopped me where I stood. Not Kendall, not Marchand. Bernadette Colbert. I looked at her name for 1 full ring. Then I answered. I had met Bernadette Colbert exactly twice before that phone call. The first time was the engagement dinner. A restaurant downtown, round table, 8 people, the kind of evening where everyone is performing ease because nobody is quite comfortable yet. Bernadette had come in wearing a deep green wrap dress and something quiet and assured in the way she carried herself. The posture of a woman who was raised to make people feel welcome, even in rooms where she herself was uncertain. She had hugged me at the door like she meant it. Asked about my work with the kind of follow-up questions that told me she had actually listened to the first answer. The second time was brief. A front yard introduction, 20 minutes. The families crossing paths before the wedding planning had any weight to it. She had hugged me then too. Both times I had filed her away the same way. A good woman attached to a complicated situation. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, and her name was on the screen. She opened carefully. Apologized for calling without warning. Said she had kept my number from the engagement dinner contact list because she had always intended to call sooner, and life had moved faster than she expected. Her voice was measured and warm, and underneath both of those things I could hear something that was working very hard to hold its shape. I told her it was no trouble at all. I kept my voice easy because I had nothing to perform and nothing to hide. She began with questions. Had I spoken to Kendall recently? Was everything all right between us? She phrased each one gently, with care. The way you phrase things when you already suspect the answer, and you are giving the other person room to come to it themselves. I listened to the shape of her concern beneath the words. She had heard something, or seen something, or noticed the particular quality of her son's silences when certain subjects came close. She was triangulating, and she was good at it. I made a decision in the space between her last question and my answer. I was not going to manage this conversation. I was not going to offer her a diplomatic version that protected her son's image at the cost of the truth. She had called me directly on a Tuesday, with her voice working to stay composed. She deserved what she was actually asking for. I told her everything, not with heat, in sequence, the monthly deposit and the credit card, and how long both had been in place. The vendor breakdown slid across my dinner table. The $15,000 counteroffer and the budget I had prepared. The meeting at the apartment, Marchand's words, Kendall's silence, my jacket button, the parking lot, the attorney call, the accounts closed, Portugal, the text. 3 words. When I finished, the line was quiet for long enough that I checked once to confirm the call was still connected. Then Bernadette said, "He told us you declined to come, that it was your choice." I said, "I understand why he said that." Another silence, longer than the first. Then she said, "I am so sorry, Lorene. I am so deeply sorry. I want to tell you what those words did, not what I expected them to do, which was confirm what I already knew. What they actually did was something quieter and more specific. They landed as recognition, one mother to another. The particular weight of a woman who has raised a child with intention and love and is now sitting with the distance between who she raised and what she is being told he did. That grief has a specific shape. I recognized it because I had been carrying a version of it myself. We sat in it together for a moment without speaking. Then her voice changed. The careful composure she had carried through the entire call was gone. What replaced it was not anger. Anger is loud and angular. This was something else, still, decided. She said, "I need to speak with my son." I thanked her for calling. After I hung up, I sat in my reading room and looked at the Portugal photograph on the side table. The sunset, the harbor, the light going gold over water. I picked it up and propped it against the lamp where I could see it properly. I had a feeling the next few days were going to be very interesting. I was not in that room. I want to be clear about that. I did not engineer what happened next. I did not call anyone beyond Valerie and my bank and Celestine. I answered Bernadette's questions honestly because she asked them directly and she deserved the truth. What the truth did after I handed it over was entirely its own business. Celestine has a cousin whose people connect to the Colbert family, the same thread she mentioned on that harbor wall in Lisbon when she told me Bernadette had looked troubled all evening. That thread held. Some details came through Bernadette herself later. Others came through family conversations that traveled the way family conversations always travel. By the end of that week, I knew enough to understand the shape of what had happened, even if I was not sitting at the table when it happened. Bernadette did not call Marchand immediately after speaking to me. That was one detail she told me herself. She sat with the conversation overnight. The next morning, she pulled out the wedding invitation and looked at it for a long time. Then she called one of the relatives who had helped coordinate portions of the wedding weekend. Not to interrogate anyone, just to ask questions. Small ones. Who paid for what? Whether my name had come up during planning. Whether anyone had mentioned why I wasn't there. The answers did not contradict what I had told her. They did not explain it either. By that evening, she was troubled enough to call Eugene. She told him everything in the same sequence I had told her. The deposits, the credit card, the vendor breakdown, the counter-offer, the apartment meeting, the ultimatum, the wedding, the text, the 3 words. Eugene listened the way Bernadette described him. A quiet man. Deliberate. The kind of man who does not speak until he has decided what he actually thinks. When she finished, he sat at his kitchen table for a long time without saying anything. Then he said something Bernadette later repeated to me almost word for word. That boy has been lying to us. Not a question. Not a maybe. A conclusion arrived at calmly and set down like something permanent. They called Marchand the following evening. Invited him and Kendall for dinner, nothing in the invitation to signal what was waiting. Normal enough on the surface. The kind of dinner a son and his new wife would accept without suspicion. I do not know every sentence that was spoken that night. What I know is what Bernadette later confirmed and what several people independently repeated afterward. The financial support came up immediately. The monthly deposits, the credit card. The years of quiet assistance that neither Marchand nor Kendall had ever fully explained to his parents. Marchand defended himself. He said the support had been offered willingly, which was true. He described it as a family arrangement. He argued that everyone had benefited from it. By every account, he spent a long time explaining why the situation was reasonable. Eugene listened. Then the conversation shifted away from money. That was the part Marchand was not prepared for. At some point, Eugene asked whether it was true that I had effectively been excluded from the wedding over the money. Not whether there had been tension, not whether feelings had been hurt, whether it was true. According to Bernadette, that was the moment the room changed. Marchand tried to describe it as a mutual decision. Eugene did not accept that answer. Your mother spoke to Lorene this week, he told him. Tell the truth. The room went quiet in a way that does not recover. I know that quality of silence. I have sat inside it myself. It is the silence of a version of events collapsing in real time with nowhere to go and no one in the room willing to help rebuild it. Kendall was sitting beside her husband, the same position she had held in that apartment when I looked at her and waited for her to speak. Now she was beside a man whose own parents were looking at him with the same clarity I had looked at her. And there was nothing beside him that was going to stay quiet on his behalf this time. I do not celebrate what happened in that room. I want the audience to understand that. I am not glad that a family is in pain. What I feel when I think about it is something more precise and less satisfying than celebration. It is the recognition that truth moves on its own once it is released. I did not send it anywhere. I simply stopped holding it back. Celestine called me 2 days after that dinner. She had one piece of information. Kendall did not go home with Marchand that night. She went to stay with a girlfriend. She had been there for 2 days. And that morning, for the first time since the wedding, she had driven past my street. She did not stop, but she drove past it twice. I knew before the knock came. I was standing at the kitchen counter when I heard the car turn into the driveway. That specific idle, the particular way Kendall's engine settles before it cuts off. I have known that sound for 7 years. I put the kettle on. I did not go to the window. I did not check my hair or straighten anything or prepare a single word of what I was going to say. I just put the kettle on and stood in my kitchen and waited. The knock was soft, almost a question. I opened the door and she was standing on the porch in clothes that had clearly been slept in. No makeup. Hair pulled back the quick way, not the careful way. She looked younger than 29 standing there, stripped of everything she usually uses to present herself to the world. For a moment, just a moment, she looked like the 14-year-old who used to call me from school trips because she could not sleep in an unfamiliar place. I stepped back and held the door open. She came in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same chairs, the same room where 8 months ago she had smoothed a vendor breakdown with her palm and waited for me to confirm what she had already decided. I set a mug in front of her and one in front of me, and I did not say a word. I let her find it. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked down at it for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know about the debt, Mama." That word. That one word at the end of the sentence. Mama. Not mom the way she had been saying it. Functional, transactional, the word you use when you need something. Mama. The word she used when she was small and something had frightened her. I listened, and she started talking, not just about the wedding, about everything that came after it. The balances she had never seen, the credit cards she thought were nearly paid off, the personal loan Marchand had taken out before they got engaged and never mentioned, the honeymoon charged onto accounts that were already carrying debt. Piece by piece, she had started discovering how much of their life had been held together by money she assumed existed but had never actually verified. She said she had believed him when he told her everything was under control. I let her go through all of it, what Marchand had told her, what she had chosen to believe, what she had not asked, because asking would have meant looking at something she was not ready to see. She talked for a long time, and I did not interrupt once, because underneath everything that had happened between us, I am still her mother, and she is still my daughter. And that does not dissolve simply because something broke. When she finished, I took a breath and I spoke carefully. I told her that what Marchand hid was his to account for. His debt, his deception, his construction of a life that looked self-sufficient from the outside while quietly depending on a foundation he did not build. That belongs to him. But then I told her the other thing. What happened in that apartment? The silence, the nod, the agreement. That belonged to Kendall alone. Nobody stood behind her with instructions. Nobody forced her hand. She looked at me, and she chose. And I needed her to understand that the woman sitting across from her had also made choices in the months since that day. Real choices. Irreversible ones. And those choices did not become undone simply because circumstances had shifted. She asked, "Does that mean you're done with me?" I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I said, "I will never be done loving you, but I am done being available the way I used to be available." That version of us is finished. What comes next, if there is a next, has to be built on something neither of us has faked. What she decides to do about her marriage is her life to navigate. That is not my question to answer, and I will not pretend it is. She nodded slowly, finished her tea, stood up. At the door, she stopped and turned. She looked at the Portugal photograph on the side table, the harbor, the light, the sunset I had watched alone from a stone wall while she got married without me. She said, "It's beautiful, Mama." Then she left. I closed the door and leaned against it and breathed. Outside, the engine started. I stood there and listened until the sound disappeared completely down the street. Then there was just the house. Quiet. Mine. I am sitting at my kitchen table. Same chair, same coffee, same morning light coming through the window the way it always has in this house. If you walked in right now and had not heard a single word of this story, you would see an ordinary woman at an ordinary table on an ordinary morning in Charlotte, North Carolina. But you have heard this story, so you know that everything that looks the same is different. And so am I. I wake without an alarm now. 6:30, most mornings. My body has found its own rhythm without the disruption of other people's emergencies pulling me out of sleep before I am ready. I make my coffee strong with 1 sugar, and I drink it slowly because there is no reason to rush it. I sit in my reading room for a full hour before I do anything else. Not checking messages, not organizing the day around someone else's needs, just reading. Just that. I have finished 4 books in the past 2 months. I started a journal, nothing dramatic, just pages where I put things I am thinking, so they do not have to live exclusively in my chest. I printed the Portugal photographs and framed 3 of them. The harbor at sunset hangs on the kitchen wall where I can see it from this chair. I look at it every morning. I called Valerie after Kendall's visit and had one final conversation about the donor-advised fund I had been considering. It is set up now, a small charitable account in my name, directed towards scholarships for first-generation college students in Charlotte. Children who are doing what I did 40 years ago, working their way into rooms that were not built with them in mind. My name attached to something that will exist after I am gone. That means more to me than I expected it to. The will stands as Valerie restructured it, built around my intentions, not around assumption or obligation, or the quiet cultural pressure that says blood automatically inherits whatever you spent your life constructing. I built this life. I decide what it becomes. Kendall and I speak. Not often. Not the easy Sunday rhythm we had before. That particular version of us belongs to a time that has closed. What we have now is more careful, more honest, maybe, than what we had before. Because what we had before was built partly on my willingness to overlook things I should have examined and partly on her willingness to take what was offered without asking what it cost me. A few weeks ago, she called just to ask how my tomatoes were doing in the backyard. No problem to solve, no account to discuss, no favor attached to it. We talked for 11 minutes about gardening and the weather and nothing important at all. When we hung up, I sat there for a moment looking at my phone. It was the first conversation we'd had in years that did not feel like a transaction. We are learning something different now. Whether it becomes what it needs to be is not something I can force. Marshawn and Kendall are still together, working through things I have no visibility into and do not ask about. That is their life. It is not my project, and it was never my responsibility to fix. What I understand now that I did not understand before is this. I spent 29 years making myself so available, so consistent, so completely organized around being needed that I became invisible in my own life. Like oxygen. You do not thank the air. You do not notice it. You only register it the moment it is gone, and the room changes temperature, and suddenly everyone is looking around, trying to understand what shifted. I was the air. The moment I sent 3 words and went back to my book, the whole room changed temperature. I do not regret the card, or the deposits, or the years of showing up. I gave those things from love, and I would give them again to someone who saw me as a person while receiving them. What I regret is the years I spent waiting to extend myself the same courtesy. To see myself as a person first, not someone's administrator, not someone's safety net. Lorene Adams. That is who I am. That is who I was the whole time. I pick up my coffee. I look at that photograph. The harbor, the light, the water going gold the evening I sat on a stone wall in a country I had never seen and felt. For the first time in longer than I could measure, entirely like myself. I think about 5 words, then 3. I smile. The real one. I pick up my book, find my page, and read. I was never waiting to be chosen. I just forgot, for a little while, that I had already chosen myself.